Over the years, I've watched television shows that go through the major trends in the 1980s, but speaking with my mom and getting a personal perspective on the decade, I gained an eye-opening view on it. When asked about recalling the 1980s, my mom laughed and jokingly said, "I burned those brain cells a long time ago." Debbie Holt gave me a better understanding of the impacts some of the social, political, and historical trends had on individuals, as well as some of the biggest differences and similarities between the 1980s and today. And these are the two topics that I will be reflecting upon right now. When discussing social, political, and historical trends, there are always some connections that I can make with my mom from the 1980s and today. Just like in the 2008 presidential election, where the country was swept up in an idea of patriotism, my mom remembers similar feelings during the Reagan administration. She remembers everything, especially the hair being bigger, the consumerism being better, and the fashion being questionable. She found it amusing that some of the same fashion that was in during the 1980s is making a comeback now today. She recalled many new television shows airing that entertained millions, like the show Cheers and the brand new television network program MTV. Along with MTV, she remembers when Michael Jackson came out with the Thriller album and the accompanying music video, and how it was the biggest and best video people had ever seen. An interesting difference she pointed out between television in the 80s and today is nowadays there are reality television shows on every channel, when in the 1980s there were none. Another major difference she pointed out was the relaxed view on cigarettes. My mom recalled being able to smoke on airplanes and while she was working at TCI Cablevision, and there were no Surgeon General warnings on cigarette packs. Not only that, but the meals served on the airplanes were actually meals served on nice silverware and nice glasses. One of the most impactful things I discovered after talking with my mom about the 1980s was not everything was cheerful as I had once imagined it to be. An interesting comparison between today and the 1980s is while there is optimism about our country, at the same time it seems as though terrible things keep happening. On a social aspect, she remembers when the AIDS disease became widely known, and specifically when Rock Hudson died of the disease. Just like today, in the natural disasters of recent, there are many storms that affected a lot of people. One such disaster she recalls quite vividly was when Mount St. Helens erupted, and her grandmother, my great-grandmother, was living in Washington State at the time. Also, similar to the BP oil spill off the Gulf Shore a few years ago, my mom recalled all the news surrounding the Exxon Valdez disaster. She remembers exactly where she was the day the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded, and the day John Lennon was shot outside of his hotel. My mom also mentioned how, not unlike the recent mass shootings throughout the country, there was also widespread murder in the 1980s. She mentioned in particular the Atlanta murders and the Green River murders. After interviewing my mom about some of the major pop culture and social events of the 1980s, I gained a better understanding of just how similar that decade was to the one we are living in now. Of course, there are some major differences, but in the big scheme of things, the two decades are not too dissimilar from each other. Hearing her speak on the major social, political, and historical trends of the 1980s, and based on the course readings and discussions surrounding the 80s, the interview with my mom not only confirmed all of the topics that we learned about, but expanded my knowledge on them as well. While I was familiar with everything she mentioned, hearing her speak on the topics gave me a better understanding of just how impactful some of the events were to not only her, but also the entire country. Thanks.